Welcome to Unlocking the Investment Upside. I'm Geoff Robinson, founder of theinvestmentanalyst.com. Today we're tackling a quiet force with huge influence, proxy advisors. Here's something that'll blow your mind. Two private companies you probably never heard of control 90% of the votes that determine the fate of nearly every major corporation in America. We're talking trillions of dollars of influence that shapes everything from CEO pay to climate policy.
That's a staggering amount of power concentrated in just two firms, ISS and Glass Lewis. How did we end up letting proxy advisors become such dominant forces in corporate governance?
Well, it's actually a fascinating story of unintended consequences. See, every spring, thousands of companies hold their annual meetings where shareholders vote on crucial decisions. But with institutional investors managing massive portfolios, it became literally impossible to analyze every vote independently.
So these proxy advisory firms stepped in to fill that gap, right? Essentially becoming the air traffic controllers of corporate voting?
Exactly, and here's what's wild. Research shows that when ISS recommends voting against something, it can tank director support by up to 20%. That's enough to make or break careers and reshape entire companies.
You know what I find particularly interesting? These firms aren't just making simple yes or no recommendations. They're analysing everything from board diversity to executive compensation packages to climate risk disclosures.
And that's where it gets complicated, because while they provide an essential service, imagine trying to analyze thousands of proxy statements during a compressed voting season. They're also creating this sort of governance monoculture.
Could you explain what you mean by governance monoculture?
Think of it this way. When you have two firms essentially setting the standards for what good governance looks like, you end up with this one-size-fits-all approach. A tech startup with a visionary founder might need very different governance structures than a mature industrial company, but they're often judged by the same rigid criteria.
That reminds me of the ongoing debate about dual-class share structures in tech companies. Proxy advisors typically oppose them automatically, right?
Precisely. And here's where it gets really interesting. ISS actually sells consulting services to the same companies they're evaluating. It's like having a restaurant critic who also runs a consulting business telling restaurants how to get better reviews.
Well, that certainly raises some eyebrows about potential conflicts of interest. How do they justify that business model?
They claim to have strict firewalls in place, but many investors remain skeptical, and what makes it more concerning is the lack of transparency. These firms aren't required to disclose their methodology or subject themselves to consistent oversight.
So what's being done to address these issues? I imagine regulators must be paying attention.
The regulatory landscape has been shifting quite a bit. Under Trump, the SEC tried to require proxy advisors to give companies advance notice of their recommendations. Biden's administration rolled that back somewhat, but the debate continues about how much oversight is appropriate.
Looking ahead, do you see any potential solutions emerging?
Actually, yes. Technology is starting to change the game in interesting ways, and new platforms are emerging that use AI and data analytics to help investors make more nuanced voting decisions. And some major players like BlackRock are now letting their clients vote their shares directly.
That direct voting option sounds promising, but do most investors really want that responsibility?
That's the million-dollar question. I think we'll see a hybrid model emerge where investors use proxy advisors as a starting point, but maintain more control over their voting decisions. It's like having GPS for navigation. Incredibly useful, but you shouldn't follow it blindly off a cliff.
Speaking of following blindly, what about passive index funds? They seem particularly dependent on proxy advisors.
That's a crucial point. With passive funds now controlling massive portions of the market, their reliance on proxy advisors has essentially concentrated even more power in these firms' hands. It's created this fascinating paradox where the rise of passive investing has actually made these active governance decisions more important than ever.
So what's the takeaway for investors and companies dealing with this system?
I think the key is recognizing that proxy advisors are neither heroes nor villains. They're tools that need to be used thoughtfully. Smart investors are developing their own voting policies, engaging directly with companies on important issues, and using proxy advisor research as just one input among many.
And for companies?
For companies, it's about understanding that while proxy advisors are powerful, they're not all powerful. The best companies focus on building genuine relationships with their shareholders and explaining their governance choices clearly, rather than just trying to check boxes on a proxy advisor's scorecard.
Sounds like we're heading toward a more nuanced future for corporate governance.
Exactly. The proxy advisory system might be imperfect, but it's evolving. And that evolution could lead to better corporate governance overall, as long as we remember that voting rights are too important to completely outsource to anyone. Throughout my career, 10 times ranked number one on Wall Street, I believed investment insight should be accessible to everyone. That's why I created Insight One. With interactive modules, real-world cases, and AI-enhanced learning, Insight One helps you understand even the most complex governance decisions. Start your journey today. Find Insight One on the App Store, Google Play, or at theinvestmentanalyst.com.